So, right into it. We've had a pretty interesting week, and by interesting, I mean actually just awful. In terms of EDG, things have not been going so well for them, or lately. And by well for them, I mean they actually lost a few games. This week, on the other hand, specifically, they actually had a losing record. 2 games won, 3 games lost. So, because of course they had a 3-set week. So, I want to start off with Kelsey. How do you... What happened? What's going on?
What happened?
What
What
happened?
happened? Ross, what happened?
What happened?
So
I don't think that's how it's supposed to work.
the primary theory from which I operate is that putting Korra 1 and Bamie in at the same time, or Amazing J and Pawn in at the same time, is a recipe for complete and utter disaster, because either way, either you can't team fight in the second half, or in the first half, you have no early game pressure. And this is how EDG operated last year for a lot of the time. And they actually had really, really inconsistent early split where they dropped a lot of games. So, like, this is not atypical for them. If we think about how many 1-1 splits and random losses to Young Glory they had, like, last year, playing with really, really low pressure early game solo laners in Korra 1 and you. This is just not shocking. It's just like Bamie, for me, is like a worse version of you. So, not that Bamie has been playing really poorly in general. I just think that, like, in terms of ceiling and some of the team fighting ability that you has, like, Bamie is the same style of player, but he hasn't hit quite that ceiling. And so, for me, this is like something that happens in their early game. They'll clear level try to make an early play, and then it'll backfire, and they'll fall behind, and then they'll still manage to almost come back, but then there will be some sort of disorganization in their team fighting just because the roster isn't used to each other, and then they'll just lose. Deft might miss position. It's like really just a matter of the pieces not fitting together properly right now.
Yeah, it seems like Bamie and Koro are really uncomfortable playing with each other because, as you mentioned in the mid game, things seem to like go okay. I feel like their skirmishing is still pretty decent, and Def can still play pretty well in those skirmishes. But like almost all of the games that EG lost this weekend, it was like, okay, they're in this. This is fine, and then they just get absolutely obliterated in a late game team fight, and then they just like lose after one team fight, and then it's just like happens every time that they get to late game with this setup.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think they're also, like, in switching between the two lineups, I think they do lose a bit of synergy, and I know that, like, Deft in particular has come under fire for, like, mispositioning in team fights, and then additionally, like, his Kalista and Tristana just honestly aren't as good as those other champions, so, like, I don't feel like that's very difficult to, like, disagree with. I don't know. Maybe you guys disagree, but I wasn't impressed with him again this week on either of those champions. So, I also think that, like, and I was talking to Kelsey about this a little bit before, but I think that, or she brought up the point about Deft's mentality, and, like, Deft as a player has kind of always been someone who's been on a team that kind of, like, not necessarily revolves around him, but gives him like a really large window of opportunity to get back in mid and late game team fights. That's what, Samsung Blue relied on, and that's what EDG last split relied on, and then to some extent the split. So I think when you're kind of shifting back and forth between different lines or like different players in the top and the mid, it's going to affect the overall performance when the team comes together. And like, in the WE set, they lost a lot of it was like Spirit just like EDG was gonna win that game until he had that like ridiculous explosive cask at like 30 minutes or something that just perfectly split EDG. So then Aluka got like Scion and Nautilus, so it was like, he's not gonna be throwing their team fights for them. So I mean the WE set isn't. Like, there were a lot of incremental things that they gave up in the early and mid-game, but at the same time, like, both of those games for me came down to, like, Spirit just kind of outplaying them a bit.
So how did they get in that position when it came to World Elite? Because with obviously everybody knows that World Elite is a last place. Well, actually, technically, are they a last place
They're
team?
tied
I always have
last
to check.
place.
They're
It's
tied
11th.
for last.
There's
Yeah.
an 11th place tie now.
Okay. So, sure, the pieces may not fit, but at the same time, you would expect that the players individually would be better. So, what happened? Like, is World Elite forming together to be a better team, or is it just a holistic? Is EDG falling apart, or at least fell apart for that 1 week?
World Elite is literally the best team in the world.
I think World Elite did overperform in that set, but at the same time, I actually don't think the individual play was that bad for EDG. Like, I didn't think it was great, and obviously I'll never think Bamey is that good. I don't know, I've just never been really impressed with him. But even like Deft and Koro, I don't think they really did that bad. I think Deft, like, sure, he wasn't exceptional, but I still think he was like average in terms of LPL carries. It's just that, you know, it's like kind of hard to gauge his performance because anytime he's not absolutely monstrous, you kind of are like, oh, Deft's slumping, but like sometimes he just has an average game. But with Koro, like, I don't know, I just feel like his synergy with that specific team, like, makeup is just not as good. I want to say it's an entire team fault because when I was watching Koro, as some people mentioned that like Koro might be slumping, but when I was watching Koro in the World Elite set, he didn't seem like he was doing anything particularly wrong. Like, I would see him playing Hecarim fairly well. Like, he would be zoning and going after Mystic and kind of keeping Jinx under wraps, so she couldn't really get much damage off. And Deft and it's not like he was just abandoning Deft at all those times either. Like, Deft was still getting some autos on the front line and stuff, but it just, yeah, I think as a team, like, they just all didn't work well together, and that I don't really think it was an individual thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. Maybe it's I don't really think it's a compositional issue, but like when I watched him play, I was like, okay, yeah, sure. Like the problem I have with the criticism on individual play for EDG is that I don't think it's fair to say Koro and Def played bad just because they played well but not exceptional. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it's just a matter of for me are like three big factors, and two of them I think are somewhat systemic and difficult to fix. But one of them is just little mistakes, right? It's just these that are showing cohesion, because historically, if you look at all of Aaron's teams, Aaron the coach, all of his teams, like, the strengths of them has been in the team building. People talk about his drafting, all this other stuff, but the pieces fit together in this way to compensate for weaknesses, like the way that the players develop their styles, the way that Pawn, for example, just does stupid, ridiculous things and pulls a lot of pressure in the early to mid game, and then Koro is able to play very well from behind, like as a top laner who receives very limited resources relative to the region average. He is still able to sometimes even win lane, or sometimes he's able to come back from behind with these like crazy ultimates and zoning. So that interesting dynamic is kind of what boosted Edward Gaming. And then the fact that all of that is happening, so there's not a lot of pressure that Clearlove has to apply in the mid or top lane, and he can focus on Deft. So that kind of overarching synergy, I think, is something that's... And then Mako controls the vision really well. Like, Mako's vision control, people don't talk about it a lot, but it's really interesting. From behind, Mako actually consistently outwards, like, his opponents by, like, double-digit warding, so... It's just an interest. So that's part of how EDG can come back from behind in some instances with their team fighting, is just because they'll just have more wards on the map than the winning team, and they'll be able to get these picks and set up these flanks. Like, their flanking is really good. Like, the way, if you think about the way they place wards, and then Koro will teleport to the ward, and like a lot of times you see these extended team fights where Koro gets low, he leaves the team fight, he goes back, he like buys home guard, and then teleports back into the fight. Like, if you don't have wards set up in such a way around the fight, you can't execute an extended team fight like that. So just the fact that all of these pieces are working together extremely well, if you disrupt some of that in some way, you're going to have more little tiny mistakes, more things that other teams can find holes in and capitalize on. Maybe, especially in a mixed language team, if you're having issues with, like, if you bring in a new player who doesn't understand the communication system, or things like that. So these things, I think, this is something that they can work on with their transitioning roster if that's something that they want to impose for the long run. Like, Clearlove posted on his Weibo that he thinks that we're in the chrysalis state and we need to go through this chrysalis state to become a butterfly or some random esoteric Clearlove shit.
As much
Most
as
of the
I
time, he just like wants to look like he's going to murder them. But there's two things I find that are actually systemic, and I'll make these brief so Mike can talk, sorry, is that teams are figuring out to target Clearlove. Like, I think that that's a mistake that a lot of teams made against EDG last split that they aren't making anymore, is that they realize that Clearlove gets a lot of the team's resources. Clearlove is the one, like, the team rises or falls based on whether or not Clearlove is making plays. All these other factors, and then so you see these supports like chase him around the jungle, and you see other junglers counter jungle him or things like that more effectively now. Also, the third thing is Deft, and within the pick and ban phase, the fact that he doesn't play Callista and you have all these other champions to ban is an issue. Like, you have to always waste a ban on Callista. And so when you face a team like WE that's so dependent on Spirit getting his champion, that can actually be a big factor.
All right, Michael?
Yeah, I agree. Actually, despite how cheesy the Clearlove message is with the Chrysalis phase thing, I actually think it's pretty accurate on a global scale rather than just like a domestic scale, because like I think that being able to win the way they are in terms of like, okay, mid and top are just going to do so well in lane that Clearlove can put all of his energy into Deft, and then Deft can carry really hard and have a strong laning phase himself. I think that works really well domestically, but I think is actually really good for future-proofing against like Korean competition, for example, because I don't feel like they're always going to be able to rely on the crutch of the fact that Koro and Pawn are just going to crush their lane. So that way they can't really get too like comfortable with that playstyle, and they can play around that and find something that works at least against other world-class teams when they get to that stage, and when Def's not like so heavily prioritized.
I think this is an interesting discussion because I feel like there are 2 points in which I want to ask you guys about and speak on. Because I guess now you're seeing teams like, as Kelsey said, more have they heavily track Clearlove in his jungle. They stop him into being that structure for his team. And so one thing I like to notice is, or at least ask you guys, I think at least World Elite the team right now that has a positive win record with EDG this split. I mean, actually, I can't even say that since it's not taking. I was actually saying this split along with playoffs as well, and I feel like if that's true, because they did go 5 games with them in playoffs, and at the same time they took 2 games here. But I would say that's in part due to the fact that the biggest strength of the World Elite comes in their jungling. It comes in Spirit and his ability to actually track down the enemy jungler at times due to his aggression, or create more impact on the map due to it.
And World Elite might be the most comfortable team in terms of understanding how like one's own jungle gets focused down. So,
so would that be a fair statement?
I think when teams are struggling, and in general in Season 5, jungle is just such, it's a really interesting point, because jungle, for me, is such an important position right now in terms of dictating pretty much everything for how your team is going to go for the first, 15, 20 minutes. I also think that WE, while I don't think that they're a particularly good team, I think that they are really good at playing around Spirit. They know what, generally they have to do in order to win a game, and it's pretty much, have Spirit carry them, right? And another thing that made a difference in those fights is that Aluka got Scion, and then he got Nautilus, like I said, so, as a Nautilus, he was just kind of standing in the middle of team fights and, just taking damage, and it's just okay, he doesn't have to do anything, because he can just soak up all the damage for the team, and then Spirit can kind of do whatever he wants, and, I think just studying junglers in, a big weird, obsession of mine lately has been just studying people's jungle pathing, studying junglers in Korea and studying junglers in China. I think that, it's a lot of successful teams are it's going to come down to how well their jungler does. And I think, I mean, you even saw it from IG in one of their games today where Qiao just, or not today, but this past week where Qiao just kind of flat out carried them on jungle echo. Like if you have a really strong jungler that can path well and, you know, set up surprises for the opposing team, it just makes a huge, huge difference in how successful your team will be.
And it's worth noting that last split, Clearlove had the highest percentage of team gold of like any jungler in the league, even more so than Spirit. So they were able to funnel a lot of resources into him. He got a lot of lane kills, and actually this week, his percentage of team gold raised a lot, especially from like the sets where he was taking a lot more early kills and kind of like trying to brute force carry in some instances. But now Spirit is that jungler. So it's like WE finally got the pieces together and was able to distribute the gold effectively into their biggest resources. So it's an interesting thing to note.
Is this a thing that's going to be threatening, like EDG as a whole? Because we're starting to see a lot more teams with that kind of style in jungle. Like, for instance, Qiao Gu. Even Beast is starting to play that kind of role, even though not so much. I feel like everyone is kind of playing that role.
He needs to stop playing middle.
Even Qiao has stepped up, particularly in terms of like where you see him moving around the map, like what he, like his selfish style. Even with Rookie, who typically gets most of that. Like Qiao is definitely claiming some of his own stakes in the game.
Yeah. Emily? You did have something to say earlier before I kind of cut you down.
Yeah, no, I was like, what was I
Grass is just rude.
I
don't do that ever.
The other thing, sorry, I'm like sick, so my mind's everywhere. The other thing I did notice in the WE EDG set, and I don't know if it's just me, like when I went back and watched the VODs again, before the show, I did notice that in team fights, and Clearlove is like such a really strong team fighting.
He has very nice
in my opinion. He had a couple of like really like weird decisions in terms of like who he went on in team fights, especially in I think the second game. Like there was one point where he jumped on a Luca. And I was just like, oh, like, he extended a fight at Dragon and basically, like, went after Aluka, even though Aluka, as Nautilus, obviously wasn't going to die. And it kind of affected the whole team fight after that. And I thought that was very odd to see from him because that's not usually something that you see from Clearlove at all. So I don't know if you guys saw that, if it was, like...
I saw it. I couldn't tell if it was just like a miscommunication thing or if it was just kind of a like, let's try to mow down the front line as hard as possible with everything we have, which obviously, you know, when a Nautilus has resources, you kind of don't want to do that.
And the way EDG does set up their team fights, if you watch, Koro is always going to be the one who tries to zone out the damage threats, right? Whereas Clearlove will try to lock down the front line and position himself between Deft and the front line. To isolate those targets to mow down first. So maybe it's just an instance of they don't know how to play around Nautilus yet, something like that. In particular, that type of style isn't working against a Nautilus composition, doesn't work against WE, etc.
Yeah, and that's what I mean with this like particular set is like it's just stylistically, even though World Elite's a much worse team, especially if EDG performs, WE has like one of the best chances of the lower teams to upset because of the fact that they're so used to dealing with this high jungle pressure, and because of the fact that Aluka is so keen on playing super tanks, and well, at least that's what he's best at, and EDG suffers against both just because of like how they play intrinsically. Words are hard.
I think the worst game for Clearlove was this week was the game they lost to WE Future.
Oh god, yeah.
Clearlove plays something that people might not realize is that Clearlove plays a lot of Nidalee in solo queue. He has a bunch of different accounts on the KR Challenger ladder that have different champion emphasis, but since Nidalee's release, his Chinese solo queue account, his most played has been Nidalee. But he hasn't ever played it in a competitive match before. So this was his first, like, he's playing it against WE Future, because Pawn would always play it, right, for EDG. and he's playing against WE Future. They have this skirmish that goes terribly, terribly wrong within the first 10 minutes of the game. PentaQ, WE Future's AD carry, gets a triple kill. And then Clearlove persistently keeps trying to gank the bottom lane and fix it, and just feeds relentlessly like the entire time. What is going on? I don't understand.
So here's my question: is how much of this? Since this is probably gonna be the last question until we turn on to a World Elite filled discussion. How much of this is EDG kind of tanking themselves through roster swaps or just whatever issues they're having currently? And how much is this other teams, let's say Qiao Gu, IG, or even World Elite, let's say, since they're having a really good week? How much is that Chinese teams catching up?
I think it might be a little bit of both, but I think it's primarily EDG's roster swaps because even though it's just one player, like Bamey being there instead of Pawn is like completely different for just the chemistry of EDG because without, like, they relied so heavily on Pawn on either being the guy that's like completely ignored and then carries by himself or the guy that literally just plays as a distraction so that the other threats can get ahead. And Bamey just kind of like exists and isn't bad or isn't great, but he doesn't complete the chemistry of the team, and so they have to play completely differently around him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's... Sorry, I was just going to briefly say that I think the mid laner, more than any other player, will dictate the style of the team. I don't think that necessarily, like, Pawn is essential to the way EDG plays their game. It's just that any particular piece removed from the team or moved around is going to change the way that they have to play, especially in terms of a team that, like, fits together so well, you know? As I already addressed, and mid lane in particular, just because it does have such a stylistic influence on the rest of the map, is going to be big.
And the two styles are just so different.
Yeah,
like, and Pawn is just like the way he plays is basically to act as a distraction and be very like flashy and forward, and that's completely different than the way Bimey plays, which is just kind of like Mike said, to exist.
And actually, before I move on, I had this question on here, and I guess I forgot to ask. Is EDG super reliant on structure? Like, for instance, every other team, let's say, in fact, you can pretty much say every team that isn't EDG. Let's just put it that way. They have a bit of lacking structure when it comes to vision control, when it comes to, I guess, map movements and how certain players act on that. Or expect their role to be played. So, like, for instance, you have Deft who relies on, I would say, the vision control and Mako to put him through. Well, usually. I think he's actually had a decent laning phase for now. But let's say Bimey or Pawn kind of expecting a lot more pressure in the mid lane. Well, not so much Bimey lately. But do you think that they really rely on the pressure, early game pressure or just early game structure that they usually had for about like a couple of years now, or do you think that's just a new thought that it's just kind of?
I think saying a couple of years is unfair, just because when it was you on the team, it was a lot less about what it is currently, which is the fact that they do rely on Koro and Pawn to get ahead, so that they can, you know, funnel Clearlove's pressure and most of the map's pressure into Pawn into Deft for late game. So it's a little bit different than it used to be, but yeah, I mean, I would say it's pretty important. I mean, you can see the proof. They switch out one player and then look how different their performance looks. But I will say that it creates an interesting topic for discussion because, like I was saying before, there's a disparity between like doing bad and doing okay, and although I do think EDG did have a legitimately bad week, they're still at the top of the charts, which is actually really impressive when you consider it's a team that's so reliant on this five-man chemistry that they're still doing well enough to stay on top with this experimentation. So, I mean, I obviously will always swear by their more efficient playstyle, but yeah, I think like was mentioned earlier with the whole Chrysalis thing, that this is something that is good for them, because it'll in the long run, even if it tanks their stats a little bit and they're not ridiculously far ahead of the domestic competition, it's still really good for investment into like just deeper strategy pool for like international competition.
And I just Sorry, and before we move on, I just want to emphasize one last thing about comparing this Edward Gaming to last year's Edward Gaming. Edward Gaming, during, like, you look at their tournament records and the fact that they won, like, every single tournament last year except for 2, and they were in the finals of those. It speaks to the, and you look at their regular season LPL performances where they were just, like, dropping games left and right to Young Glory. The first split, they didn't even come in first in the regular season. The second split, they just barely in the last week inched ahead of OMG and Starhorn. But then they just always won. So this idea that they were a completely dominant team is somewhat obfuscated by their tournament results. And I think that as long as they're still winning, they're still EDG, they're still ahead. So.
Okay. Alright, moving on to the next topic, which is not so far off. World Elite. They didn't drop a single game this week. They beat EDG, beat M3, who is on the rise, or at least that's what's being read here. And that's the word on the street.
Master 3. To clarify, they beat Master 3 in Demacia Cup, not LPL.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, they
And let's just to double check to see. Actually, they only had a 1-game week, so they're literally 1 game was EDG in the LPL, or 1 set. And so, what can we take from this? Is this team improving, or just things going wrong? I'm going to start with Michael.
Well, I do think they are slightly improving, but I also think that the results are skewed based on poor drafting from many of the teams faced. Like, the fact that Spirit was able to get away with a lot of junglers he's comfortable on, and that Aluka could even get Scion was, like, really uncomfortable to me. But I also do think that it was a pretty overperforming week for Mystic, too, which I think was a big reason why WE did so well this week.
Chelsea?
I also think that...
Oh, Emily, just kidding.
No, I was just going to say, like, I think piggybacking on that point, I feel like a lot of... Draft is really weird right now because there are a lot of, like, power picks that I feel that teams think that they need to ban out. But the thing with World Elite is that because, like, and this is going to sound kind of bad, but, like, there's one, in my opinion, there's one person on that team that I want to target, and it's Spirit. So I feel like you can, to some extent, forget about some of those power picks, but with so many available, I feel like sometimes, like, when those are introduced, especially in the form of new champions, like Echo, I feel like teams think that they either need to ban them out or, you know, like, pick them away from them, when in reality, like, with World Elite specifically, I wouldn't even focus on that. Like, I would just still focus on banning out Spirit because he's obviously their best player. So I think that is kind of skewing it a bit as well in terms of the way other teams have approached World Elite is a bit off to me. And if they go back to targeting Spirit, I think you'll probably see, like, expected results once again.
Yeah, and my kind of, like, tinfoil hat theory is that that I mentioned before we went live, is that the fact that these players think there's no threat at all for World Elite to actually get into playoffs or do well, which is, like, this is entirely anecdotal. There's absolutely no evidence to this whatsoever, but it feels like a lot of teams might be just trying to get practice against World Elite with more idolized like compositions and stuff, just because, yeah, they're not really threatening their place in the standings. They're still last. But
Kelsey?
And just to clarify on the drafting issue, it's not like, oh, okay, well, we kind of screwed up here, and Spirit has changed his mind, and he's playing Gragas this game, and Rek'Sai this game, and Italy another game. He literally played Gragas in all 5 of the games that they played. So it's just like, after the first game where he's playing Gragas, and he's having such a big impact on, like, game-winning ultimates in the last, it's like, okay, maybe we ban Gragas this game. Nope, it's cool. M3 watches the set against CDG. Maybe we should ban Gragas, guys. Nah, it's totally cool. We got this. So
I like those team comps.
It's almost like I don't. And they're not. It's not like they're banning. They're saying, oh, okay, well, Spirit just has so many high impact champions. We're gonna ban, like, Nidalee, Rek'Sai, and Echo, and we're just gonna let him. Like, Gragas. We think we can deal with the Gragas. It's like literally they just ban Echo. It's like the only champion they've banned against him, and since he's played it once, it's like, okay, this is a Spirit champion technically. and he lost that game also to RNG, so it's not even like it's a high impact pick for him, like the Gragas or the Nidalee or the Rek'Sai. So it seems like it has to be intentional. Like, they have to know that they're doing this. There's no way they can miss this if he's played it. Like, by the time you're at the 5th game and you're in draft phase and you're thinking back to WE playing against EDG, you're thinking back to the last 2 games that you just lost, nah, let's not ban Gragas. Like, it has to be intentional.
Is there too much to ban for World Elite? Because I feel like the old bans that still continue to come through are Nidalee, Sion. Is that an outdated ban? Like, I feel like those bans are a bit outdated in the sense that, sure, Nidalee is actually seeing still quite a bit. Sion, I feel, might be a bit of a outdated one, and I guess now we're seeing Nautilus from him. So, is the answer purely in pick bans for this team?
Again, I don't think it's entirely pick ban, but I do think that is also matchup specific. Like, for instance, I think EDG is justified in banning away Sion, whereas other teams that have trouble with, jungle control might think Nidalee's a better ban. But, I mean, sure, you can't ban everything. You can't ban all the power picks, but you can at least ban Gragas. Like, this is one ban against something that's statistically proven to be working very well in Spirit's hands. There's just no reason at all to let him get away with it. Logically speaking. So.
Okay.
And the thing with Nidalee is that he can literally 1v3 on the champion. Like, I don't even think it matters if you let Aluka play Sion or if you let Aluka play Nautilus that much. We still have to gauge the Nautilus, because I think Nautilus is actually really overpowered right now, Nautilus top. So that's something to consider, but I don't think those matter as much as, because what makes Aluka effective on those champions is that he can set up for Spirit. So Spirit doesn't have his power picks. That's the more important thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Alright then. We can only... What games... Actually, let's see. What games are scheduled for next week? Just to see if they continue to get tested.
They face King, so... That's going to be an important game to see which team can handle... But King's bans, I think, have been somewhat intelligent in that against OMG, they were really the first team to ban out the Maokai Sivir composition that OMG likes to use, things like that. So it might be an interesting matchup. I still think, I mean, we're talking about Hue. So, if Clearlove is having trouble against Spirit, teams that... and I feel like King has a very obvious trajectory towards beating them as well. Just like gank the bottom lane, guys. Let's go. I have no idea what inSec is doing. We can talk about this later.
I just talk about it now. Let's move on to King. So, King. I mean, I said it when we came into this episode about EDG. What the fuck is happening? What is going on with this team? Kelsey? Just to continue your thought, probably. Actually, Michael, just kidding. But screw Kelsey.
I'll let Kelsey go first.
Okay, Kelsey.
They split with OMG. They got O2'd by IG. And they've been splitting against they 2-0'd UP. So they actually had a positive week overall. And their wins against Unlimited Potential were actually very convincing.
Do you think that they're on the...
But their loss to Invictus Gaming was the first perfect game I think we've had all year, and that King didn't get a single dragon, a single tower, or a single kill.
Yep.
I also think it was really smart for IG to take Echo away from Corrin and use it in the jungle for that match as well.
Yeah, and that was... IG's drafting that set. Like, we were talking about how IG's drafting has been kind of AWOL because Malphite hasn't been playing. It's just kind of like, okay, for King, we're just going to show up and screw them over completely. Because the first set, they had this really smart draft where they first picked Echo, and because Rookie has had great Echo performances, they had no reason to believe that wasn't a mid lane pick. It ends up in the jungle after they pick Yasuo as a counter. The game is still extremely close, but... that Aurelia, I think, is actually really smart against King, even though Aurelia isn't like a big meta pick, because Name, the way he positions is like very positional threat oriented, so he'll stand on the line, right? Effectively, like, he's really good at finding the line, and this is what made him really, really strong in the past, is he's very good at finding that line where he can stand on immobile AD carries and continue to have damage output. But Aurelia can just like dive that line extremely well. So there are actually instances where King will win during that series where King won a fight, but then Zzitais, in his last breath, dove Name and killed him, so they couldn't push towers, right? So, it worked really well in keeping IG alive in that first game.
Mm-hmm.
And they managed to win in like a last-ditch fight on the third Baron, because King actually snuck like 2 Barons that game. And then the last game, just their draft was completely demolishing, where they, like, Corrin has always been a weakness on in terms of his champion pool that is very easy to exploit, because he has played a lot of champions in his career, but during any single time he's only really competitive on like a select handful, so it's really easy to ban him out typically, and he defaulted to that LeBlanc and couldn't get ahead because they kept him down, so it just went really, really bad for them.
So would you say that Name's how do I put this? That he has impeccable auto spacing? Anyways, going on to the next.
I prefer the terminology positional threat. Okay.
Okay.
I think that's a term I invented anyway, so...
Yeah, I've never heard that before. Good job.
It makes more sense to me.
It makes sense, though.
It makes a lot more sense than auto spacing. So, actually, it's not on the list here, but I think that now that we spoke about King, we might as well talk about RNG. RNG right now is actually, in my opinion, performing surprisingly well.
They had
and on
one
top
set.
of that, yeah, but still.
They had one set and a Demacia Cup performance where they got 3-1 because, and the one game where they won, like, kitties like randomly fed for no reason, so I don't even count that, so...
They still had pretty competitive games against...
They're doing really well, guys. Come on.
I'm talking about the RNG standard. For the longest time, I felt like they were a really shitty team.
They're beating Magus top Flandre. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think
stuff.
that's a good set to gauge them on. And like Snake was running this weird like 5-threat composition that had like no frontline or anything.
What did they beat them? What did they win against last week? WE. Okay, good. Let's just.
All right.
I was actually.
Raz just got blasted.
I'm gonna go in on this. I'm gonna go in on this.
Thing about RNG. I was talking to someone else about this. I was talking to Stoll about this, and he is a huge RNG fan. So if he's watching this, and I think the thing with RNG is that
RNG fans.
they can take that up with him. But I think the thing with RNG is that they do have a lot of like raw talent. And I think they can take a game off of most teams, to be honest. Like, I think they can surprise teams. I think they can take a game. But I still don't see them having any sort of, like, I think it's almost like a weird, like, where they're setting up their fans for kind of, like, false hope. Because I still don't see a lot of cohesion or, like, as much of an understanding of what they need to do on the map at certain times, like what objectives they need to take, how they need to move as a team. I just don't see them, like, I do think they have a lot of talent, I just don't see them being able to win, like, a best of set. Like, I think they can take games off people, but I think it's almost, like, kind of weird to say that they're good, because I still don't think they're a good team.
You know what's weird about RNG?
They're literally king. They're literally king with a more proactive mid laner. Not even a more skilled mid laner, but a more proactive mid laner.
Yeah, and again, I mean, even though we say that mid affects, like, you know, the team's playstyle so much, they still have the same exact issues they had when they were king, I feel, so... And, yeah, the teams are getting better, so that obviously puts them in a worse spot.
Just a second. You guys govern yourselves. I gotta quickly attend to some things.
Friend.
Interesting. Okay, so.
My host.
Wow. What do we feel about the vision control?
No, but as in terms of like King, since we kind of like glossed over that really quick, I don't know. like it's kind of hard to gauge King's performance too. Like I think they went positive, but I also like especially in the set against OMG, I feel like I don't know. Corrin's like Echo is super overperforming, and I also think that like it wasn't that hard of a set for them just because they were able to ban away or take away Maokai and Sivir from OMG, which made the set like significantly harder for OMG, obviously, because those are two champions that always make OMG do well. So
I think that speaks well of them, though. Like, I actually like it stinks because, like, first of all, they had the horrible like first 2 weeks without Zero and inSec, and then
We don't talk
like
about
inSec,
this.
like who knows what he's doing up in top lane? Like I'm used to it, but you guys aren't. So.
No, it's actually
like, I think they come in with like some pretty good strategies. I just think two things. One, teams for whatever reason, to Kelsey's point, tend to like come in and they're like, oh, we're gonna play our best against King. And then secondly, I think that I don't know, they're so far behind. It's going to be really difficult for them to win enough games to actually make it into playoffs at this point, just because of that start. So while I'd like to see them do well, like while I'm honestly like really rooting for them, I don't have a lot of high hopes, unfortunately.
So, like, given how competitive I feel the split is, because we do see teams like WE and UP taking games off EDG, we do see teams like OMG and RNG splitting series, like Qiao Gu dropping a game to King here and there. It's just the more 1-1 splits we see, the more entrenched standings become, you know, because teams just stay where they are. And so those 2-0s start to matter a lot more, and King only has 1 2-0 so far, and they're not gonna like, it's sure we could say, oh, it's impressive that they came out with a strategy that allowed them to take this game off of LGD, because I actually think their rotational play in that game was really smart, or that, oh, they were the first team to see through OMG's weaknesses, so that's really cool for them. I just like Corrin's Echo is looks like he actually understands the champion, which is surprising for him. But just these little things don't make them a playoffs worthy team necessarily, you know what I mean, unless they can get those 2-0s.
And there has been one team, so I'm trying to wrestle control back after my absence, that might be a playoff worthy team. There's a little bit of discussion. M3, Masters 3. What do you guys feel about them? How's their week been?
They had a really good week, but at the same time, my thoughts for M3 is like, okay, if they can't get significantly ahead in the early game, then they can't do anything. But if they're able to consistently get ahead in the early game, then they have a chance. But I feel like that, I mean, I think that gives them playoff potential, but I don't know about so much beyond that, because they still have trouble when they don't have like a massive gold advantage, I feel. So.
The thing with the Master 3 is that in the past they've just been so inconsistent. Like, we've seen them come out with smart strategies and things during a week. They were the first team to 2-0 Snake last split. Things like that. Sometimes Dade decides he wants to play a game. Sometimes Looper decides he wants to play some League of Legends. The only actual consistent player on that team seems to be Condi, and he's consistent insofar as he can have a strong game impact if he's playing Rek'Sai. And otherwise, he looks really lost, to be honest. Or Lee Sin. I'll give him Lee Sin. But the question is, okay, so it's not surprising that they had a good week to me. They've had good weeks in the past. And at the same token, it's not surprising to me that they got 0-3'd by WE in Demacia Cup. Thought I actually had a game where he did look like he was trying, which is surprising for me in the context of third-party tournaments, and it didn't work. And sometimes that'll work for M3, and sometimes it doesn't. And I'm not gonna say Master 3 is a good team until we see like them have a week where they and I feel like every single game it was like Dade had a good game, Dade had a bad game. Every single set, I mean, Dade had a good game, Dade had a bad game, Dade had a good game, Dade had a bad game. So until I see a set or a week where it's like Dade had a good game, Dade had a good game, Dade had a good game, Dade had a good game. If he's going to be a primary carry threat on that team, they're not going to go anywhere unless he's having good games.
I think
He
another
stops
thing.
counterpicking himself. Anyways, yeah.
Well,
Emily?
he's never gonna stop doing that. He did that in Korea too.
Yeah, he does.
It's just a Dade thing. You have to just kind of. Yeah. Another thing that I do want to bring up though with their schedule this week is that they did face IG and IG when they were going through and it was actually honestly like a really awful set to watch in my opinion. But the IG was going through their weird growing pain, like whatever's going on with that team, if they are having internal issues, etc. Like that was Master 3's first set, and even then, like they played so hesitantly, like that the games were super long, and
they just kept throwing in dives at the base.
Yeah, it was not okay. So I think
okay. I am not okay anymore, guys. I lost this game.
It was not okay.
That's actually why she's sick.
Like I felt, that's what it was. Like those IG M3 games just tilted me so hard that I felt ill for the rest of the week. I think when you're evaluating their performance from this past week, like you really have to look beyond the record and look at that set specifically, and then ask yourself, like, is this a good team? Because I don't think the answer will be yes if you watch those sets against that set against IG.
Yeah, and I will say that I think that I'd like to see Love CD on Alistair more, like roaming, because I think that they did really well with that, and I think that was part of why they did well in the early game. So that's one thing I can give kudos for.
I do think Love CD's game impact was their strongest asset last split, and part of that was that he actually works well with Candy, but according to reports, he didn't like Candy, so that's why Candy isn't playing anymore. And we have SMLZ! Thank God for
He's like,
SMLZ.
I love you, so I'm gonna leave you alone. Bye.
SMLZ, the biggest disappointment in terms of hype in Chinese League of Legends history. So,
or possibly of any League of Legends history, given the hype.
He was literally known as Wei Xiao's disciple.
Yeah, it's like a fake. It's like a faker had a
and-
student, and he's like, "All right, go forth, my son," and then it just ends up
And then he
being
just,
like,
and
I
Frost, as Frostgrun likes to remind us every night on the broadcast, and we're just so sad about it. It's like, no, please, no more. Stop reminding me.
No.
And then this is what he looks like. It's almost like I feel people think it's gotten to the point where people are going to start to think that Wei Xiao was never that good, because if this is his disciple, this is what he brought to the scene. Then oh my
God.
God.
History,
It's actually just becoming a meme at this point. It's actually just the disciple. It's like, no, I don't want him to.
Please no.
I don't want Wei Xiao's name to be mentioned near SMLC. Sad days. So, talking about redemption stories, because I know that we spoke about Invictus Gaming. Hopefully, should we talk about IG? I think we already did last week, right? About their troubles, about their woes, about their suckings, and I feel like
it's also just really hard to talk about them because of the random nature of it.
Zzitais is going to invite all of his fans to his house in Beijing with his family if they win Demacia Cup, because Demacia Cup's finals are in Beijing. So he's like, party at my place. By the way, guys, Zzitais is like
I forgot he's a millionaire.
Zzitais is a child of privilege. For those of
that
you
is
who
hilarious.
did not know.
That's putting it lightly.
That'd be sick.
Party at Zzitais' house.
I had to think of that one a little bit because I was like, he's bringing them to his house, but that sounds a little. Wait a minute. Like, extremely rich.
His house is actually Beijing.
Yeah, the entire city.
And apparently he has steady printed in sticky notes on his computer screen 100 times. Like the word steady in Chinese. Because apparently he needs 100 reminders not to be himself. So,
Good
Love
stuff.
Zzitais.
But speaking about redemption, that IG is currently on the road to, we have OMG and Loveling's return. So, OMG, huh?
Yeah, OMG, guys.
Yeah, yay!
Woo!
OMG.
Yeah.
Woo! Woo!
Damn. Well, man, I really wish we got an eyeglass, or at least an eyeglass
Monocle?
with a monocle, an eyeglass. I hope that we gotta look like, damn, I really want to look into the mind of OMG through an interview. Damn, where would we find something? No, anyways, so
Oh, no,
OMG.
we're done with the episode already. Okay. No.
No.
Are we
Well,
already
we'll
at
come
shit?
back to that one later on. But how did OMG do? How are they doing? They brought Loveling back. Is he his old self, or is he? No, I'm not gonna go. No, that's a little dark. So how's Loveling do? How did Loveling do?
He felt really sloppy in my opinion. Like, not
Yeah.
even just in terms of the team being comfortable with him, but just individually. Like, he wouldn't really calculate when it was proper to appeal or engage, and like there was times where he made really simple mistakes, like just move speed type errors. Like, I remember when he was trying to chase down Deft to zone him out, he literally just like chased him as Deft kited him to death, and like there was absolutely no way he could have reached him given his cooldowns and his move speed versus Deft's, and he still like went after it and just literally did nothing and just died in that team fight. And I think Deft kind of snowballed off of that a little bit, and I don't know, it was just, I don't know. I mean, Loveling has had these games in regular season games before, so I'm not like overly concerned, and I do hope they kind of like keep him on board. But he definitely looked uncomfortable for his first game back.
Here's the real question: is his uncomfortable game as good or better than juejue's good games? Or is juejue like a really, like, how do you weight their skill or what
Dude,
they've shown?
It's honestly really, for me, it's like really hard to actually dissect that, because OMG with Loveling and with juejue seem to have the same issues. Like, they, especially when they were diving, like, holy cow, they were so overzealous with dives, and they almost always went poorly for them. Like, okay, it was either they would dive, and then they would trade a kill because they were irresponsible with tower damage, or they would dive and, like, for instance, which set was it? I don't think it was against Bamey. It was against LGD, where they were tunneling on diving top, and Cool was like struggling really hard against Wayless, and Wayless was just like crushing him while they diverted all their resources top, and didn't even get much out of it, and still fell behind in turrets. So I don't know.
So, for those of you who don't know,
Here we go.
Loveling is my favorite player in all of League of Legends history. So, we already
Here
know
comes.
that this is gonna
Yep.
be bad. Okay, but I'm going to set aside this information as much as it pains me. I'm just gonna say I'm really sad. But problem with OMG is just gonna be how telegraphed the jungle pathing is right now. And it's been this problem with juejue, it's been the problem with Loveling, and you can say it's the jungler's fault, but the fact that they'll always be in UZI's lane at like 4 minutes into the game is something that I think other junglers know. So despite the fact that OMG tends to dive and go for these early ganks, it gets turned on them a lot. And we saw that especially in the first game, where like Clearlove was there at the moment they tried to make a dive attempt, and it went wrong. Clearlove then got like a second kill. Clearlove then went mid, where Cool was like... I think when we saw juejue have such a successful game, remember when he was playing Lee Sin and he had that set where he went like 5-0-1 in the first like 10 minutes or whatever? He was ganking mid. I think a big part of that is just that people were just shocked that he ganked mid. The team they were facing was just like, like, if you watch their early ganks, they're almost always in UZI's lane. And another thing about Loveling is that hasn't been his career for most of it. He'll sometimes say San and see San and say, "Hey, buddy, how you doing? I still love you. Here's a hug." And then, like, it was, like, more of a surprise that he was ganking bottom lane than anything, but approaching a lane with, like, 2 players in it is very different from approaching a solo lane, which Lovelane's career is much more about ganking solo lanes.
Yep.
So, meanwhile, Clearlove has always played with the best AD carries in the world, and he's like, hey, I know how to gank bottom lane. It's in my blood. I was born of this. You are not. But yeah, Loveling did not have a good first set back. I will say this, but I think that OMG's problem is much more systemic, and when people look at a jungler performing poorly, whether it be juejue or Loveling, it's going to have a lot to do with just the team dynamic in general and what the jungler is asked to do. So I'm not gonna say, I don't think Loveling did better than juejue, but I don't think he did worse either. And I think it was just like a very similar poor system that they had.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think my, like, kind of a combination of both of your points, so I'll just try to make this brief so I'm not repeating what you said.
I just want to say he had 100% kill participation.
Like, I think that
I'm so sorry. Yeah, no, it was
for
bad.
Loveling, like looking at Loveling the player and considering his history, he did not play well. But in terms of like his overall game impact on OMG and what they wanted to do, I thought it was pretty equal to what juejue has done this season, and additionally better than what they did in playoffs last split.
To clarify, it's just sad to say that, you know? Because Loveling does have this history of having been the best Chinese jungler, and juejue, when you saw him on OMD, which had a very different team dynamic and was driven by, like, he was not a good jungler! juejue was not a good jungler on that team either, and he's not a good jungler on this team, so it's not just like... And the fact to say that Loveling is performing like juejue is actually just like a big slap in the face. But no, I agree with you. It's just like, that's the reality of the situation. So.
Well, and I think it has a lot to do with like how OMG is playing. Like the problem they had last split is that they didn't have an identity and they didn't really know how to play with Uzi, and so they then morphed into this team that was built entirely around like Uzi, and now, you know, juejue can do, like, it's come down to what I saw this week is Loveling can play that role about as well as juejue can.
And
which
so really
is sad in context.
I mean, it looked interchangeable, but I also would like to point out that this is like Loveling's first game, and juejue's been playing like all of the other regular season games.
Yeah.
So even though like a lot of the performance that OMG is having is dictated by the team in general rather than the jungle performance, I do think that it's more beneficial to keep Loveling in. But I'm someone that always said that the way that OMG is playing right now, I don't feel like it would be penalizing to bring back Loveling, or, you know, obviously good going if he was in shape, but...
And both Going and Loveling may have made recent statements on their Weibo where they feel like they underperformed. They effectively said they feel like they underperformed last split, and they want to come back and help lead the team to the future. And when I did that interview with OMG recently, their statement effectively implied that they want to work with the roster that works the best and is the most team-oriented, and they're willing to try a bunch of different things. And the reason why they didn't start the older players like Going and Loveling isn't because they're just benched forever, it's just because they quote-unquote, needed more time to work on themselves. And I think Cloud is also included in this as well, so... to work on themselves and specifically their emotional issues.
Yeah, to the idea of ganking bottom lane. And it's something that isn't discussed a lot, but at the same time is extremely important to have. I guess it's extremely important to have that discussion because you'll have a lot of teams that focus their pressure in the mid lane or in the top lane. But bot lane ganks have a bit of a issue in constructing. Like, for instance, right off the bat you can say, well, it depends who the 2 champions are that you're ganking. The support, is it a Thresh? Like, okay, do you have to go after the Thresh? Is it a Kalista? Is it pre-6 Kalista? Like, having that, like, that concept, is it even possible to gank that lane? First of all, how far are they pushed up, so you have to talk about, like, the position of the lane and how you can gank. Do you have to dive? And the worst part of all of it is TP timing and mid lane wave pressure. And who do you need to have all that shit down first before you gank bottom lane? EDG. You need to know if the mid laner can't roam. You need to know if the top laner can't TP. You need to understand all of this shit. And so that's why some teams will just shy away completely from ganking bottom lane. And that's why I think the answer to ganking bot that OMG has decided to really move on, I don't want to say it's the wrong decision, but it's a really fucking hard decision. So they need to, I feel like if that's the move that they want to go for. And here's the worst part of all of this is that even though they won their game, or at least they were the most impressive when it came to ganking mid lane this time, it was mostly on the idea that it was unexpected. The moment that you have your bot lane gank expected, literally that is the worst. That is actually bad. And making your jungle, like your gank, predictable on the worst lane to make it predictable in the sense that they can turn it back on you in like a dime and have like 5 people in that lane. That's my little tangent on that. I don't like the concept of it until you're a team that has the coordination to be able to like expect and pressure that 5-man bot lane team fight that's pretty much might just happen, like LGD did in the finals against EDG like last play in the playoffs. I mean,
TLDR: if you are paired with Raz in solo queue, do not play bottom lane.
Yeah.
I will not gank.
You will never gank your lane.
I will not gank for you. It's not going to happen.
No, I mean it's interesting, and I do think that it wasn't that Loveling was such an exceptional jungler in terms of like his angle of approach or where he was in the lane or all this other stuff. It's just because he literally had the freedom to dictate which lane he wanted to gank, like where he was going to go, and so his ganks were more unexpected within the context of the Chinese meta than a lot of junglers who did just like go bottom lane all the time. So without that element of surprise, who is Loveling? And he's not dueling and invading or anything like that. He's building Devourer. I think juejue ramped up in his effectiveness also with more time with the team. So that's an interesting thought as well.
Alright. So, with all that said, we should probably, do you guys have any other points? Should we talk about LSPL? I feel like the next week is actually kind of sad.
We were going
because
to discuss top laners, but yeah, we can talk about LSPL too.
Let's talk about top laners then, because I don't want to talk about LSPL, because I feel like we should talk about that next time, because next time will be a pretty bad LPL week in terms of quality of games, or at least that's what it seems like. So let's talk about top laners.
Yay!
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 Yeah.
So top laners in the LPL have been kind of on and off. Mostly off. Top laners right now. You know, I remember going into the spring split saying, well, this is the highest quality top lane talent that we have seen in quite some time. Well, somewhere along that line, it started to go downhill. So, let's start off with you. How would you rate the current top lane talent in China?
I mean, I think there's a lot of talent, like, in terms of, like, what they're doing. I think, like, Flandre is probably the one that annoys me the most, because, like, inSec is whatever. Vici is kind of, like, I'm used to inSec top lane, like, my first and, like, one true League of Legends love is KT Bullets, so, obviously, I've seen a lot of inSec. And he's playing pretty much exactly the same.
Just the way she said that.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I've seen a lot of inSec.
Yeah.
I'm ashamed to admit that I've watched quite a bit of inSec.
This is not invaluable use of my time. I've done it and I will own it.
But, you know, you kind of get used to it because he pretty much plays the same. And then, like, you obviously had, like, I thought Flame and Acorn had a really good week. I mean, LGD looked really good. But in terms of top laner that annoys me the most, because again, Zzitais is kind of like inSec, where he's just going to do his own thing and you kind of just have to get used to it. And I kind of love him for that, so I don't know if it's just like Stockholm Syndrome for being so used to inSec.
It's like, oh,
carries over. I'm
this is like Chinese inSec.
I
What is this?
Yeah, like, but Flandre is just baffling to me in terms of like, and I honestly kind of love Snake for like trying out random like crazy stuff, but I also like kind of hate them for it because it's like you get stuff like Flandre this week building like Magus Echo, and it's just not okay. It's not. It was just bad, and then like when he fell behind, he couldn't keep up, and I don't know. Flandre confuses me, and this is from someone who loves inSec. So like use that to frame that context.
When you talk about gold distribution and team dynamic, and you're talking about like which top laners tilt you the most, it's gotta be the ones that the teams expects them to carry, right? And then they're building Magus enchantment and feeding.
Yeah.
Because the way that these team dynamics are set up is that in King, inSec receives below average gold distribution. Most of it goes to actually, like, the above average gold distributions are actually mid lane and support, with Name just slightly above average, so that's like kind of how they're distributing their resources. With Invictus Gaming, Zzitais does receive above average gold distribution, but it's mostly going to be mid jungle in terms of where they put most of their resources. If you look at Snake's gold distribution, it's like, okay, we've got some for Crystal down here, and all of this stuff is going to Flandre. Like, this is, we're just gonna put it on Flandre, and he's literally just wasting gold building Magus enchantment Triforce builds. And
Magus enchantment Triforce.
Yeah,
I can't. I don't understand it. Like, it's
Dude, that's so much AP.
so much
Come on.
AP. Come on. Obviously. He obviously assumed he's, like, out of it, because I feel like having read conversations about Flandre is he's only, like, half paying attention to stuff that's going on. Because looking at a conversation between him and Rookie, he thinks that their opponent in Demacia Cup this week is King, when it's actually Starhorn Royal Club. So that's, like, close, right?
Yeah.
They're
Kinda
not
works on a technical level.
Yeah, it's not exactly the same. So he's like talking about how I'm going to beat inSec 1v1 and all this
Oh
other
my
shit.
god.
Just
Stop.
like- But so at the same time you kind of got, he reads the patch notes about Runeglaive and he's looking at the items and he's like assuming it's Runeglaive. Then he's just building it on Fizz. It's just like, this makes sense. We got this.
This works. We got this.
This is
Hey, this works on
beautiful.
Echo. It's like,
And he's just not even, he's only like half there.
So maybe he's just a space cadet.
He was in Maokai prison for so long that they've given him freedom to be a carry threat again, and he's just like enjoying it. He's playing Azir top and solo queue. He's living it up.
Yee.
Yeah.
Look forward to that as your top.
I
That's what I love.
really hope it does not come out. Like, if it does, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna be so sad. Because also, like, Yu is one of the better Azir players in LPL as well, so
yeah.
if you're going to draft Azir, I mean, please.
Yeah, and I feel like
For the
that's the
love of
thing
God.
about Snake that I just don't understand, but I always love in the sense that, like, they were a team that literally got contained in Spring Split. Like, LSPL, they had a style, they just they did their own shit regardless of whether or not it was good. And you know what? He played AP Fizz top, and that he loved that. So he just kept going on. He played AP Fizz top. He played Yasuo top. Was horrible on Yasuo top, but he continued to play it regardless. He like,
Fun.
it was fun.
The video games are for, right?
That's exactly. And Spring Split, yeah, the team just got contained. He was like, I'm playing Maokai again? Okay, fine. I have to build Zeke's arrow? Alright. It's like, so now he's just bringing it all out there. This is his midlife crisis, per se. And he's just going all out.
At like 17 years old.
At 17 years. That's his esports midlife crisis. His Chinese esports. He started at the young age of 10.
Pretty much.
16.
They say he's 17 now, but last year I was informed that he was 14, so it's like we missed its time warp somewhere in there. Like, I'm not sure
Seems
what's
to
going
happen a
on.
lot. I don't know how, but I mean,
But he's
Crazy
also
how
the
it
team's
works.
top
Very
shot
quick.
caller, so that's the other thing about Flandre, is that he is the team's shot caller, so it's like,
I
What
swear
is-
they all have the
what is
last name
happening?
Fly. They all have the last name McFly. You just one day they're 14, the next they're 18. You're like, what happened? It's like,
What?
Marty, what's going on?
Marty?
So,
That's funny because there's a player on Snake named Martin. Oh!
We solved.
the snake conspiracy.
Conspiracy.
In all seriousness, like, as much as I don't understand Flandre and he's just kind of doing his own wacky stuff, like, I kind of love Snake this season for what they're doing. Like, even when they make no sense, I don't know, they're fun to watch, except for, like in a really frustrating way, too. Like, that time they picked poke composition and proceeded to wait until late game and 5v5 team fight with it for no reason. Like, I don't know. They're interesting.
Trying.
And I think I maintain what I said after the first week, is that I appreciate that they were able to actually, like, identify a lot of weaknesses that they had from the previous split and are kind of carrying them into this split. So I don't know. I appreciate them a lot more this split. I'm actually currently writing an article about them. It's probably
We have an actual mid laner that
Yes.
we can do stuff with.
Yeah,
This
that's
is
a big
so
deal.
amazing. What is
Definitely.
this?
I
The
think with
possibilities are literally endless. Oh my gosh.
you
Unlimited.
don't have to lock
They're,
in 0 to 5.
they're endlessly unlimited. VG Gaming and unlimited potential. Okay. But
Mike's like, I want to make a fucking point.
No, I mean,
yeah.
nothing too big. I just want to say that I think what Snake needs to do with Flandre is find like a happy medium, because I wasn't really happy when he was like super confined to like playing a tank style with no resources after coming from the LSPL where he did do this crazy wacky shit. But also, you know, they need to be a little bit more disciplined with him in the fact that he can't go completely overboard, but he should still kind of have his own flavor. So I think if they find like a good happy medium with Flandre, they'll be good. But right now, he's just like goes super out of bounds with his builds and shit. It needs to kind of be toned down.
And I really liked like one of the early games that they played where they had the dual lane carry threat, right? Where they had Flandre play like Aurelia, and I think you played LeBlanc, maybe, or something like that. And then we had Crystal play Sivir. So it's just they actually are in a position, as much as I don't like, as much as I've been critical of Crystal, I should say, and he's shown that he has more dimensions, and they're in a position where they can actually run compositions based around any of their laners as threats, and sometimes even Beast, though please, like, the Nidalee has gotten excessive at this point.
No.
So they're trying to figure out what works. It's just reining it in. The other thing about Snake, though, is that their drafting has never been that strong in general. So if they are willing to experiment with these compositions, I think that they have to sit down and understand where the strengths and the weaknesses of these compositions lie before they execute them, because they're going to need to compensate for that. Like, they're going to really need to understand how to draft them. So that's an aspect that can be looked at, is like, how are we going to draft these compositions we want to experiment with, so we don't end up in a situation where we don't have any wave clear and we don't have any team fight capability against, like, the quote-unquote RNG turtle comp, as Frostgren called it on the broadcast. So and they didn't have any siege potential either. It was just kind of a mess.
It relies on positional threatening.
Oh god.
Positional threat, and RNG wasn't splitting up, because if you think about RNG, that team's not going to split up ever. So how are you going to run a pick comp against that? It's not going to work.
So what's going on? Like, just on a larger scale of things, with Team World Elite, obviously they have lovable Aluka, King. They have a set two. They have Sky and Let Me, both of which
They
are.
also have played Ackerman for one game, so they technically have 3 top laners.
God damn it! Unlimited potential.
Unlike some teams that don't even have actual top laners.
Real top laners.
They just have,
They don't.
I'm
they
looking
have
at you,
masquerading
VG
top
Gaming.
laners.
Oh hey, how you doing, ADG?
inSec.
inSec is.
He's
the
like
Jax
he's like the worst out of all the pseudo top laners.
The Jax
too now. It's
buffs,
bad.
though, free cola, right? Jack's
Free
buffs.
cola.
Free
Maybe, perhaps.
cola.
Yum.
I
That's
can't
actually a
believe you
wrinkle.
said that. I can't wait. I love that. We give you too much freedom, much like Flandre. Like, on this show. Give you too
It's
much.
definitely a bad thing.
Is Cola specifically not playing for performance, or is there like another reason that
And
I don't know about?
there's some rumors that Cola didn't really want to play. I also
Because like inSec is definitely not an upgrade, even over Cola at his worst. I feel.
my
I
theory,
mean, I know it sounds harsh,
I don't
but-
know. inSec's had some good Yasuo games. I just said that. Please stop me. But I think
He's a perfect fit, man.
the problem is that inSec and Zero have developed actually really strong synergy. Like when they're working together, it looks really good. But the other issue is that inSec was not doing well in the jungle meta.
Mhm.
As the jungle meta perhaps becomes more aggressive and he can play more Lee Sin games, maybe he'll be better in the jungle, but at the moment, like, I actually think top is a better position for him. So,
Someone tweet at me, correct me, but wasn't inSec's last Korean game, game in Korea, the worst inSec jungle game I've seen in my life? That's the real question. I'm wondering. I might be wrong, because I remember I was probably the biggest
Well,
one.
I do remember before he left to like China, wasn't he considered like the worst jungler out of the entire like OGM
Yeah.
league?
well, statistically, he was
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
worst.
because they.
He fed his ass off in that one game, and for most of those games. But specifically that one, that was actually painful to watch. I'm gonna see if I can find VODs of that and then put it out on Twitter. But
And now all of the junglers have followed him to China, and he cannot escape.
Yeah.
can't-
He's like, I thought I was gonna be good.
The only way to escape is to transition to the top lane. But then they follow him there
then
too!
they followed you.
Yeah.
Dandy, why?
He's like, I won't let inSec outdo me. I must.
The best way to
I am
track a
superior
jungler.
He
top
can't
laner."
escape it.
And he is.
Dandy is
better
literally
top laner
counter
than
ganking inSec's career right now.
He's counter jungling his career. He's literally there
counter-ganking.
tracking him.
We always talk about how Dandy is best known for his counter ganking
Counter
style.
jungling. He's literally counter jungled inSec his
He's
entire
counter ganked
career.
inSec's career right now.
I feel like Vici took it too literally when Dandy was given the advice that he should track inSec in the jungle. So he tracked him to the top lane.
Okay, this joke has gone way too far.
So I guess my question is now, is there anything else that you guys want to talk about? I feel like we pretty much tried across the land of LPL and Demacia Cup. We might want to hold on to LPL.
Demacia Cup this week I actually think will be really good, round of 16. Qiao Gu versus LGD is coming up, a best of 5.
That should be good.
That's a really
Mhm.
exciting best of 5. The cool thing about Demacia Cup is that if LGD wins, OMG wins, King wins, and Snake wins, we technically have a complete replication of the playoffs bracket, with the exception that King is actually not King. But yeah, so that's really interesting, and it's really hyped up, and I guess like the Beijing tickets have already completely sold out. They sold out within 6 hours. So the community is really excited, like for all 3 days, for the quarterfinals through the finals. So the community is really excited about the possibility of seeing like the LPL spring playoffs recreated. But the round of 16 finishes this week, so we'll know for sure what our quarterfinals brackets in Beijing looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I am excited for the LGD versus Qiao Gu set. OMG versus Hyper Youth Gaming. Come on, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah, King versus
Yeah.
Unlimited Potential.
Mm.
I mean, we
We,
like based on their LPL set, that should be one-sided, but we can't really base anything off of LPL sets.
Yep.
We know for a
Sadly
fact
enough.
that that doesn't really work. And Snake versus Starhorn Royal Club, which I don't know. The U versus Sask matchup appeals to me.
I keep calling him Assassin.
Yeah, it's
I love Sask.
JS, Assassin, Sask, all
Yeah.
the same person. So,
Mm.
and I actually really like their AD carry because they were using Wei for a while, and I was just like, oh god, this team. Y4 is back, and he's actually pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So that is exciting.
Alright. So, anyone else? What are you guys looking forward to next week? And what did we not tread on for this week? For next week, we have Hyper Youth Gaming versus OMG, LGD versus Qiao Gu, as she said, King versus UP. Well, actually, King versus UP and Snake versus Starhorn Royal Club might. Oh, yeah, that'll happen. So she already said that. Ah,
Yeah.
I love her beating people. That's my
Raz
hobby.
is kind of like Flandre, he's only half paying attention.
Sure.
Flandre's literally
You are
been...
Flandre, Raz.
Flandre's
Thank
been
you.
How do you
unleashed
feel
into
about
into Chinatown. Okay. The spirit of Flandre, it moves us all. The circle... No, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, nope.
At least you cut that off quickly.
There we go.
Oh, God.
You all knew where I was going, so it's
Yeah.
fine. Nothing more
So-
needs to be said.
We
LGD
probably-
versus EDG
Mhm.
next week, too.
Yeah.
That should be good.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Everyone is excited for that.
It'll either be nice or it'll just be a horrible thing to watch as LGD confuses itself. So,
Well, we feel kind of like LGD is refining their synergy now that PYL's
Yeah.
back. EDG is deteriorating, so in that regard, like that's what happened in the last playoffs, right? LGD was completely on point, and EDG was like they hadn't practiced all week because Pond was missing, so
yeah,
it's like a recreation of the playoffs finals.
there you go. This is exactly what we needed. So, episodes. It's relative. I don't know. It's pretty nice, and I'd like to call this a nice hour and
20
30,
minutes.
20 minutes
Mhm.
episode. I like that idea. So let's go. Let's throw it off to the good old. I wouldn't go. Oh yeah. I'm just gonna head off to Kelsey since you probably have. No. Okay.
Shoutouts.
Need to reform my thoughts. I'm dying a little inside right now. This is the worst 10 seconds of my life. Emily, start
Yes.
with you. Shoutouts.
Shout out to LOL Esports because I write for them and stuff, and also to Liquid Legends because I'm talking about Brazil this week on that site. So look for that if you're a Brazil fan. I don't know how many of you would be watching China Talk, but and then like I said, I have an article on Snake that should be coming out either tonight or tomorrow. So, yay!
Yeah.
Hey.
Michael.
And go read Kelsey's article on OMG because she had an
I mean, I
awesome
was
interview.
about to hold out on that one. All right, Mike.
Yeah, same. Just shout out to Esports Heaven and the lovely panelists here, and yeah, that OMG article is pretty cool if you like are into the deeper infrastructural stuff. So
All right. I guess it's not a secret now, Kelsey. I was trying to hold it off to the last
I
point.
suck.
Kelsey,
So,
shut up.
I think I'm gonna say go ahead and watch Ryan Lue's video on You, which is actually really well edited. Like it's funny in a lot of moments that's Rachel Younggu did the translations and the subtitles for that in English. Hopefully he will continue to set that up so that we can see more features like that about players. They're like really well polished. They're almost LOL Esports style player features. Now, also for me on the Score, shout out to the Score. They employ me. I did that recent OMG article. Thank you to Reasony who helped with the translation, Sharon Lee who facilitated the interview, and the CEO who is really open to doing work and interviews with me. Drexen who will one day write an article. He said so on Twitter.
hey, I wrote one like
Yeah,
a
he
month
did.
ago.
That was a good article. I like it.
Thanks. I'll try
As
to
for
write
me-
another one this month.
I might-
Dignitas EU News. Congratulations to Razzleplasm, who has not only become the new China Talk host, but he's also become the new Dignitas EU analyst, and eventually he will replace Ross Proskeren on the LPL cast in Australia as well. So
He'll just do all of those things.
he is
And then
becoming
Emily will be
Proskeren.
next Big EU analyst, and
Oh god, no.
it'll continue the revolving door around the world. Everybody, wave your hands as we end this show.
Hands, like both of them.
Both of them.
It's gonna make
Okay.
it hard for
I don't
me
know
to
how
have
we're going to
that
turn off. Okay, they're in this. This is fine. And then they just get absolutely obliterated in a late game team fight, and then they just like lose after one team fight, and then it's just like happens every time that they get to late game with this setup.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think they're also like in switching between the two lineups. I think they do lose a bit of synergy, and I know that like Deft in particular has come under fire for like mispositioning in team fights, and then additionally like his Kalista and Tristana just honestly aren't as good as those other champions. So like I don't feel like that's very difficult to like disagree with. I don't know. Maybe you guys disagree, but I wasn't impressed with him again this week on either of those champions. So I also think that like, and I was talking to Kelsey about this a little bit before, but I think that, or she brought up the point about Deft's mentality, and like Deft as a player has kind of always been someone who's been on a team that kind of like not necessarily revolves around him, but gives him like a really large window of opportunity to get back in mid and late game team fights. That's what, you know, Samsung Blue relied on, and that's what EDG last split relied on, and then to some extent this split. So I think when you're kind of shifting back and forth between different lines or like different players in the top and the mid, it's going to affect the overall performance when the team comes together. And like in the WE set, they lost a lot of it was like Spirit just like EDG was gonna win that game until he had that like ridiculous explosive cask at like 30 minutes or something that just perfectly split EDG. So then Aluka got like Scion and Nautilus, so it was like, you know, he's not going to be throwing their team fights for them. So, I mean, the WE set isn't, like, there were a lot of incremental things that they gave up in the early and mid game, but at the same time, like, both of those games for me came down to, like, Spirit just kind of outplaying them a bit.
So how did they get in that position when it came to World Elite? Because with obviously everybody knows that World Elite is a last place. Well, actually, technically, are they a last place?
They're tied.
I always have to check.
They're tied for last.
There's an 11th place tie now.
As
Most
much
of the
as
time, he just like wants to look like he's going to murder them. But there's two things I find that are actually systemic, and I'll make these brief so Mike can talk. Sorry, is that teams are figuring out to target clear love. Like, I think that that's a mistake that a lot of teams made against EDG last split that they aren't making anymore, is that they realize that clear love gets a lot of the team's resources. Clear love is the one, like, the team rises or falls based on whether or not clear love is making plays. All these other factors. And then so you see these supports, like, chase him around the jungle, and you see other junglers counter jungle him or things like that more effectively now. Also, the third thing is Deft, and within the pick and ban phase, the fact that he doesn't play Kalista and you have all these other champions to ban is an issue. Like, you have to always waste a ban on Kalista. And so when you face a team like WE that's so dependent on Spirit getting his champion, that can actually be a big factor.
All right, Michael?
Yeah, I agree. Actually, despite how cheesy the clear love message is with the Chrysalis phase thing, I actually think it's pretty accurate on a global scale rather than just like a domestic scale, because like I think that being able to win the way they are in terms of like, okay, mid and top are just going to do so well in lane that clear love can put all of his energy into Deft, and then Deft can carry really hard and have a strong laning phase himself. I think that works really well domestically, but I think is actually really good for future-proofing against like Korean competition, for example, because I don't feel like they're always going to be able to rely on the crunch of the fact that Koro and Pawn are just going to crush their lane. So that way they can't really get too like comfortable with that playstyle, and they can play around that and find something that works at least against other world-class teams when they get to that stage, and when Deft's not like so heavily prioritized.
I think this is an interesting discussion because I feel like there are 2 points in which I want to ask you guys about and speak on. Because I guess now you're seeing teams like, as Kelsey said, more have like they heavily track clear love in his jungle. They stop him into being that structure for his team. And so one thing I like to notice is, or at least ask you guys, I think at least World Elite the team right now that has a positive win. So, right into it, we've had a pretty interesting week, and by interesting I mean actually just awful, in terms of EDG. Things have not been going so well for them, or lately, and by well for them I mean they actually lost a few games. This week, on the other hand, specifically, they actually had a losing record. 2 games won, 3 games lost. So, because of course they had a 3-set week. So, I want to start off with Kelsey. What happened? What's going on?
What happened?
What happened?
What happened? Ross, what happened?
What happened?
So,
I don't think that's how it's supposed to work.
the primary theory from which I operate is that putting Korra 1 and Bamie in at the same time, or Amazing J and Pawn in at the same time, is a recipe for complete and utter disaster, because either you can't team fight in the second half, or in the first half, you have no early game pressure. And this is how EDG operated last year for a lot of the time. And they actually had really, really inconsistent early split where they dropped a lot of games. So, like, this is not atypical for them. If we think about how many 1-1 splits and random losses to Young Glory they had, like, last year, playing with really, really low pressure early game solo laners in Korra 1 and you, this is just not shocking. It's just like Bamie, for me, is like a worse version of you. So, not that Bamie has been playing really poorly in general, I just think that, like, in terms of ceiling and some of the team fighting ability that you has, like, Bamie is the same style of player, but he hasn't hit quite that ceiling. And so, for me, this is like something that happens in their early game. They'll clear level try to make an early play, and then it'll backfire, and they'll fall behind, and then they'll still manage to almost come back, but then there will be some sort of disorganization in their team fighting just because the roster isn't used to each other, and then they'll just lose. Deft might miss position. It's like really just a matter of the pieces not fitting together properly right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like Bamie and Koro are really uncomfortable playing with each other because, as you mentioned in the mid game, things seem to like go okay. I feel like their skirmishing is still pretty decent, and Deft can still play pretty well in those skirmishes. But like almost all of the games that EDG lost this weekend, it was like okay.
Okay, so sure, the pieces may not fit, but at the same time, you would expect that the players individually would be better. So, what happened? Like, is World Elite forming together to be a better team, or is it just a holistic? Is EDG falling apart, or at least fell apart for that 1 week?
World Elite is literally the best team in the world.
I think World Elite did overperform in that set, but at the same time, I actually don't think the individual play was that bad for EDG. Like, I didn't think it was great, and obviously, I'll never think Bamie is that good. I don't know. I've just never been really impressed with him. But even like Deft and Koro, I don't think they really did that bad. I think Deft, like, sure, he wasn't exceptional, but I still think he was like average in terms of LPL carries. It's just that, you know, it's like kind of hard to gauge his performance because anytime he's not absolutely monstrous, you kind of are like, oh, Deft's slumping. But like sometimes he just has an average game. But with Koro, like, I don't know. I just feel like his synergy with that specific team, like, makeup is just not as good. I want to say it's an entire team fault because when I was watching Koro, as some people mentioned that like Koro might be slumping, but when I was watching Koro in the World Elite set, he didn't seem like he was doing anything particularly wrong. Like, I would see him playing Hecarim fairly well. Like, he would be zoning and going after Mystic and kind of keeping Jinx under wraps, so she couldn't really get much damage off. And Deft and it's not like he was just abandoning Deft at all those times either. Like, Deft was still getting some autos on the front line and stuff, but it just, yeah, I think as a team, like, they just all didn't work well together, and that I don't really think it was an individual thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. Maybe it's I don't really think it's a compositional issue, but like when I watched him play, I was like, okay, yeah, sure. Like the problem I have with the criticism on individual play for EDG is that I don't think it's fair to say Koro and Deft played bad just because they played well but not exceptional. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's just a matter of there, for me, are like 3 big factors, and 2 of them I think are somewhat systemic and difficult to fix. But one of them is just little mistakes, right? It's just these that are showing cohesion, because historically, if you look at all of Aaron's teams, Aaron the coach, all of his teams, like, the strengths of them has been in the team building. People talk about his drafting, all this other stuff, but the pieces fit together in this way to compensate for weaknesses, like the way that the players develop their styles, the way that Pawn, for example, just does stupid, ridiculous things and pulls a lot of pressure in the early to mid game, And then Koro is able to play very well from behind, like as someone who, as a top laner who receives very limited resources relative to the region average. He is still able to sometimes even win lane, or sometimes he's able to come back from behind with these like crazy ultimates and zoning. So that interesting dynamic is kind of what boosted Edward Gaming. And then the fact that all of that is happening, so there's not a lot of pressure that Clearlove has to apply in the mid or top lane, and he can focus on deft. So that kind of overarching synergy, I think, is something that's... And then Mako controls the vision really well. Like, Mako's vision control, people don't talk about it a lot, but it's really interesting. From behind, Mako actually consistently outwards, like, his opponents by, like, double-digit warding, so... It's just an interest. So that's part of how EDG can come back from behind in some instances with their team fighting, is just because they'll just have more wards on the map than the winning team, and they'll be able to get these picks and set up these flanks. Like, their flanking is really good. Like, the way, if you think about the way they place wards, and then Koro will teleport to the ward, and like a lot of times you see these extended team fights where Koro gets low, he leaves the team fight, he goes back, he like buys home guard, and then teleports back into the fight. Like, if you don't have wards set up in such a way around the fight, you can't execute an extended team fight like that. So just the fact that all of these pieces are working together extremely well, if you disrupt some of that in some way, you're going to have more little tiny mistakes, more things that other teams can find holes in and capitalize on. Maybe, especially in a mixed language team, if you're having issues with, like, if you bring in a new player who doesn't understand the communication system, or things like that. So these things, I think, this is something that they can work on with their transitioning roster, if that's something that they want to impose for the long run. Like, Clearlove posted on his Weibo that he thinks that we're in the chrysalis state, and we need to go through this chrysalis state to become a butterfly, or some random esoteric Clearlove shit.